From WBEZ Atlanta, it's Serial, with a C. My name is Zoya.
This is Stella.
And I'm Judy.
For almost 20 years, the case of Hae Min Lee has been heavily debated around the world. As time passes, theories about the murder gets more interesting and speculative.
Today, we are going to discuss our final viewpoint on the case, including what actually happened on the day of January 13, 1999.
The case has been highly controversial, in part due to how little we truly know about what happened. However, using the details that we do know, we believe that Hae was murdered primarily by Adnan Syed with assistance from Jay Wilds.
Firstly, we need to prove that Adnan and Jay were together at Lincoln Park on January 13th. According to Jen, a friend of Jay's, the 709 and 716 calls that are found on Adnan's cell records were pinged a tower near Lincoln Park, and they were made by herself to Adnan's cell phone.
This provides the baseline of our argument, the proof that Jay and Adnan were together. The counterclaim to this would be that it didn't matter that they were together because they could have been doing anything other than burying Hae. But don't you think that's too much of a weird coincidence? I mean, Adnan and Jay together around Lincoln Park around the time Hae was allegedly buried.
Another piece of evidence against Adnan is Josh's testimony. Before we explain the interview, we would like to say that Josh has a little reason to lie during his interview with Sarah Koenig. He was definitely not close to Jay, and this interview was taken years after Adnan's conviction.
Josh was a co-worker of Jay's. Josh claimed in an interview with Sarah Koenig that around the time that Hae's case was being investigated, Jay was terrified of the person connected to the murder. Josh described Jay's behaviors, saying that he continuously asked Josh to come over to the store that he worked in because of his fear. Koenig asked him who Jay was scared of, and Josh implied that it was Adnan.
Jay also testified years later that he only assisted in the crime because he was afraid of Adnan reporting him to the police.
Although helping someone to bury someone else is a serious crime, I think this is a pretty logical reason.
Josh's testimony provides with a source outside of Adnan and Jay's friend group, who says that Adnan was brought up when Jay talked about the murder.
Yeah, and all I get from this testimony is Jay's fear. He was genuinely terrified of being hurt in some way by the murderer.
Jay's testimony also gives further reason for his involvement.
Even with all Jay's inconsistencies, I'm still somewhat believing him. Not that every part of his story might be true, but how could he fabricate a story that matches quite a bit of evidence provided, like the call log? And why would he tag himself in his story if he was lying?
Maybe to make himself more credible? But still, he probably figured out how much heat he was going to get. So the point is, Jay's story may not be 100% consistent, but we don't really see a reason for him to lie unless he did it.
Which we don't have a motive for.
Also, Jay testified that he knew where Hae's car was located, and the police were able to find her car in the location that he provided. This proves that Jay was involved in this murder. In fact, he might be way more engaged to it than what he testified. But that's a story for a different day.
If Jay was not as involved in the murder as he claimed, then how was he able to recall so many of the things that happened? Looking back at his testimonies, including the inconsistencies, there were a couple of big things that he was able to remember that no one knew about. So I'm thinking this is enough to prove that Jay played a major role in this case.
The final piece of evidence looks really bad for Adnan's defense. The Nisha call is our biggest piece of evidence against Adnan. According to Nisha, a friend of Adnan's, the 3:32 p.m. call on Adnan's cell record was a call to her. She testifies that she spoke to both Adnan and Jay, meaning they were together around the time that Hae was killed.
Adnan claimed that he and Jay were not together during the time of this call. Yet here, Nisha is insisting that she talked to both of them. Any objections?
Could she have mistaken the call with a different call on another day? She did mention them being at the video store that Jay worked at, even though he didn't work there until weeks after the call.
She could have, but then again, couldn't she have made a mistake after learning that Jay worked there later on? Like, when she learned that he worked there in the trial maybe, she could have added it to her story accidentally. That doesn't prove that they were in the store that day.
Don't be fooled by our pretend confidence. In actuality, nobody knows for sure who killed Hae Min Lee.
I mean, the only thing we as spectators of this case can do is investigate with the limited amount of resources that we have.
What happens next? Well, if you're right, Adnan stays in jail.
Don't you think it's unfair that Jay didn't serve any time in jail, even though he participated in this murder case? In fact, he didn't even take the initiative to alert others about Anand's plan just because Anand was threatening him. Like, am I the only person that's thinking about how ridiculous that is not to speak up when there's a whole murder plan going on and you're 100% aware of it?
The Maryland judicial system would disagree. Technically, he did help the police determine who the primary criminal was, and I think that he was pressured into helping. From what I've heard about him, he isn't the type of guy to just commit this crime by himself. But then again, rumors are not to be trusted. Or are they?
Next time on Serial.